everyone. Welcome to In Mom's Kitchen with Jake and Janna. I'm Chef Jake. Janna is behind the camera today.
Hi guys.
I wish she was up front today. She's so much better than this than I am, and she's so much easier on the eyes than me. But today we are in our grocery store, local grocery store, to talk about what we talked about in our segment about spices. And we thought you can't really have a great informative cooking show unless you take you into the grocery store and show you how to pick ingredients.
And I noticed you wore your chef coat today.
Yeah, you know what? I've actually really started to enjoy wearing my chef coat when I come to the grocery store. Before I used to hate it because I get questions all the time. But now I've accepted it, I've embraced it, and it's now, no ma'am, I don't work here, but the cooking oil is in aisle 7. I recommend you use coconut oil for that fish. So again, I've embraced it. So here we are in the grocery store with my chef coat on.
You should hand out some business cards while you're here.
Yeah, you know what? I should have a shameless plug, go up and down the aisles and passing out cards, because honestly, 4 or 5 times a trip, I'm asked questions when I wear my chef coat. So a shameless plug for the show.
And you look pretty cute in it too.
Well, that's the second reason why I used to wear my chef coat in the store. That was before you, of course. So here we are in our spice aisle. And in talking about spices, we did not want to go to a specialty grocery store like a Whole Foods or Trader Joe's. We want to be in a grocery store where we are every day. This is our local Publix. But one thing that I am super excited about now with spices is look at the aisle now. It is such a food. It shows you how important a food trend it is and how great spices are. When I was cooking, when I first got started, you know, there was the paprika and just the yellow curry powder, salt and pepper, and maybe a few others, but now there are so many great spices to choose from, really up your culinary game. So in the show last week, we talked about grinding our own spices. Coriander seeds, we did those. Again, anything that you can buy in seed form, like we talked about, and toast and grind is really, really great to do. But one thing that we didn't talk about in our cooking segment last time is that you can actually toast ground spices, and you can still get that great flavor. Same technique, same way of doing it. Putting in a saute pan in a 300-degree oven just until they start to become aromatic. Now, I always encourage people to toast their spices in an oven because it gets a nice warm heat distribution over top. It doesn't toast the bottom like it would if you were to cook it on the stovetop. You get a nice good heat. Another thing to remember is to always turn your fan off. Otherwise, you're going to get a face full of spices. And also, if your oven does not have the option where you can turn off your fan, do it on the saute pan, put on a very low heat. And again, one thing too that we talked about, you noticed that when we toasted our spices last time, we did them separate. We didn't put them all together. And I recommend that you do the exact same thing when you're toasting your ground spices. And the reason for that is they all toast at different temperatures. They all, sometimes, for instance, garlic powder will burn quite quickly. Some of the others, so if you can do separate cooking times with different spices, you're going to get a much better product. And the great thing is when you combine them, you'll be able to really taste those distinct flavors, garlic and paprika or whatever your spice blend is. If you put them all in the same pan and toast them all together, they're going to be unevenly toasted, and you're not going to be able to pick up all the little...
And so again, you only want to toast them until they start to become aromatic.
Exactly, just until you can start to smell them, like we talked about in class, using all of your senses in cooking. Okay, so again, ground spices, they are just as easily toasted. Do them separate in an oven, just until they become fragrant. Okay, and one thing that we're going to really teach you in our cooking classes that are kind of different than others is the idea how to layer flavors. You know what I mean? So when you're eating a soup, if you got curry powder in there, and if you have seasoning salt, if you have oregano, we want you to be able to taste each one of those flavor profiles differently. And so by toasting them separate and then combining, that's how that happens.
So I have a question for you, Chef Jake. I know one of your favorite spices to use is cinnamon sticks. Would you ever recommend putting that in the oven for a few minutes before you throw those?
That's a great question. Again, cinnamon sticks, warm them up, and they'll start to become fragrant, and then use that microplane like we did our nutmeg to just shave them nice and thin. Great, that's a great question. Another thing about spices is how to choose the right spices, right? So one thing here, you see organic spices and then regular spices. And the difference between organic and regular is that organic spices are not They're not radiated. There's no pesticides or anything. They're all natural. And most spices have caking agents, which are added to them, which prevent them from clumping and caking together. Organic spices have those natural caking agents. It's called calcium silicate, and then so those are more natural. Some of these other spices too, again, they're when it comes to flavors, organic or regular, there's not a whole lot of difference. It's just the idea of how they were treated and so forth. There are no pesticides in the organic. So if it's a budgetary thing for you, price really isn't going to be. Price is going to be what's going to be different. The spices and the concentrates are still going to be exactly the same. All right. One thing too. Look at all these salts. Salt is one thing that we're going to talk a lot about. All chefs will tell you the best salt to use is going to be kosher salt. Now, a box like this of kosher salt, this will literally last you a year. I mean, this salt is something that we're not going to use a whole lot of. One thing to keep in mind when you're using kosher salt is that if you ever change brands, make sure that you kind of test things out a little bit, because not all salts are created equally. Some of them are a little bit more salty than others. So we learn very, very harshly in the restaurant that if you change salts, make sure you test them out, because we had a complaint for a couple of days as we were getting adjusted to the new salt. You have these Himalayan sea salts, which also in sea salts, of course, these are really designed for to be finishing salts. I love using Himalayan salts in vinaigrettes, as well as sauces and so forth, because it has a more in-depth, more concentrated salt flavor. Another thing to remember when you're seasoning your food and using salt is always salt at the end. We talked about using ground spices in the beginning. Use salt at the end. Just adjust slightly with seasoning. If you salt at the beginning, you can't control the end result. And finally, the last thing I kind of wanted to talk to you about is the difference in price of these things. So, well, as we talked about, the only difference when it comes to some of these spices, it's not going to be in flavor, it's going to be in price. And the reason for that is different packaging. Some of these glass jars, glass bottles, plus these nice labels and marketing campaigns, that's the only difference really when it comes to spices and difference in price. So if we come down here, you'll see some of these they're in plastic containers. Store brand. Significantly less expensive. The flavors are not going to be less than the other stuff. It's just they don't have to pay for marketing campaigns, and they don't have to pay for fancy glass bottles. So if you're shopping for spices on a budget, these spices are just as good as in glass jars. And finally, the last tip I have for you is if you can find a grocery store where they sell spices in bulk, large glass jars where you can just take small amounts of spices, that's what I really, really recommend that you do. That way, because spices have a tendency to lose their flavor a little bit faster. If you can kind of get smaller amounts, it's much, much better for you. But again, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for all your feedback and our new subscribers. We're going to get better at this. We're learning lots of new tricks. Join us next week as we get into some more spice blends and we talk about how to really punch up your food with spices.
And don't forget our motto: if we can, we should.
Thanks for joining us.